The cabin was tense with quiet wealth, private whispers, crisp newspaper folds, and the faint chime of a champagne flute filled the first-class section of Flight 742, bound from LAX to Heathrow. Tray tables were up, and seatbelts clicked into place. No one expected turbulence, at least not this kind. Julian R. Caldwell II, heir to the Caldwell tech empire and one of the most discreetly influential young black billionaires in waiting, was thumbing through his tablet. Dressed in understated, designer wear, with a Cartier watch glinting under his cuff, Julian didn't try to be noticed. But he always was. The flight attendant, Melissa Hartley, a seasoned stewardess of 20 years, approached with that distinct airline smile, halfway between courtesy and exhaustion. But something about Julian's relaxed confidence rubbed her wrong. Maybe it was his casual tone, the way he ordered Evian, or maybe something deeper she hadn't examined in herself. Their interaction began with the typical pleasantries. But when Melissa misheard his drink order for the second time, Julian D. gently repeated himself. What happened next was so fast, so shocking that even the couple in 1A dropped their copy of the Financial Times. A slap. Open-handed. Audible. It stunned the entire row. Julian's face went still, but his eyes told a different story. In one motion, he unlocked his phone and made a single call. "Get me Dad," he said calmly. 37 minutes later, the plane was grounded in Denver. What happened next became the most watched story of the year, sparking conversations about race, power, wealth, and the invisible lines people still crossed, even at 40,000 feet. The smell of fresh leather and subtle hints of citrus-scented disinfectant filled the first-class cabin of Flight 742. The soft hum of engines preparing for takeoff reverberated through the luxury of private screens, reclining seats, and complimentary champagne. Los Angeles International Airport buzzed behind the sealed windows, but inside the aircraft, everything was tranquil. For most, Julian R. Caldwell II sat in seat 2B, calm, poised, and immersed in an annotated copy of Sapiens. A quiet storm of potential wrapped in tailored cashmere. He was 31, composed, and carried the weight of $1 trillion legacy on his shoulders like a second skin. His skin, deep brown, clear, unbothered, often preceded his name, prompting judgment, long before recognition. Julian was the only son of Reginald Caldwell Sr., founder of Caldwell Tech, a global software and aerospace conglomerate that had risen from the ashes of the dot-com bust to become one of the world's most powerful companies. While Julian bore the title of Vice President of Innovation, his real work took place far from the limelight. He'd spearheaded community reinvestment efforts, funded scholarships, and started his own AI think tank, but preferred letting results, not reputation, do the talking. "Excuse me, sir. Are you ready to order?" A clipped voice interrupted his reading. Melissa Hartley stood with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd been flying for 2 decades, her seniority and grace once the hallmark of her professionalism. But lately she felt frayed. This flight, 6 hours to London, was supposed to be uneventful, quick, predictable. Julian looked up and nodded politely. "Just water for now. Still, please. Evian, if you have it." She nodded, wrote something on her notepad and turned. She didn't say it aloud, but something about the way he spoke, soft-spoken, confident, maybe even entitled, rubbed her wrong. She wasn't racist, she told herself, just tired of dealing with rich people who thought the world bent for them. Behind, Julian, his assistant, Leah Moore, organized files on her tablet. Efficient, no nonsense, and fiercely protective, she monitored everything: calls, meetings, media. Next to her, Andre, a sharply dressed but discreet man with a coiled frame and sharp eyes, sat reading a nondescript magazine. He was Julian's chief of security. The pilot's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Farrow. We're expecting a smooth flight across the Atlantic, arriving in London a little ahead of schedule. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service. Julian put his book aside, eyes scanning the cabin. A newlywed couple in 1A, a Hollywood producer he vaguely recognized in 3C, and a quiet older man beside him reading The Economist. Everyone seemed settled. The attendant returned with a cup. Julian took a sip. Sparkling. I asked for still. Melissa stiffened. This is what we have. If you wanted something different, you should have clarified. I did, Julian replied, calm but firm. A pause. Her eyes narrowed. She took the cup, turned sharply, and returned with another. She handed it to him a bit too briskly. The second cup was also sparkling. Julian raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, this still isn't correct. I asked for aviation, and that was the moment. In one fluid motion, Melissa reached out and slapped him. The sound was like a firecracker. Leah gasped. Andre stood halfway out of his seat. The producer in 3C lowered his sunglasses. Julian didn't move. His eyes met hers, cold, calm, deadly quiet. He reached for his phone. Dialed. Put me through to Dad. A pause. Tell him we're not airborne yet. And I've just been assaulted. 37 minutes later, the plane was no longer cleared for departure. Grounded. Every engine wound down. The world had just shifted course. Julian sat still, as if absorbing every molecule of air. Around him, the atmosphere in first class turned heavy with uncertainty. The slap had punctured the cabin's equilibrium. Now silence, thin and waiting, wrapped itself around each passenger. Leah leaned in close. Want me to call legal? Julian shook his head. Dad will handle it. In New York City, Reginald Caldwell Sr. ended the call with his son and began making his own. He wasn't a man who yelled. He moved with precision. His first call was to Eleanor James, Caldwell Tech's chief legal officer. Within minutes, she was composing a complaint to Crest Airlines and coordinating with the FAA's regulatory contact. The wheels were already turning. Then came Marcus Doyle in media strategy. Marcus, Reginald said, do not release anything yet. Just prepare it and speak to Camilla. Camilla Reed, his chief of crisis PR, was already ahead of him. She placed quiet calls to 3 journalists and sent a background packet titled Incident Report, Flight 742. Meanwhile, on board the aircraft, Captain Farrow received a coded message from ground control. It didn't say much, but the implication was clear. Land the plane. Immediately. He turned to his co-pilot, sighing. Denver it is. As the announcement crackled overhead, passengers started whispering. In 1A, the newlywed wife asked her husband if someone was sick. In row 3, a man tapped away on his phone, recording reactions. Social media posts were already going live. Julian closed his eyes, listening to the rumble of the descent. In the galley, Melissa leaned against the counter, breathing shallowly. She'd been pulled from service. Another attendant had taken over. A manager from the airline was waiting at the terminal. Her hands were shaking. Back in first class, Andre sat like a statue. Leah opened her tablet and began typing a sequence of protected notes. None of them spoke. The plane landed. Denver International was bracing for the storm before the wheels touched the runway. A teenager in row 6 had posted a blurry video. It had audio, the slap, the gasps. Julian's voice, calm, lethal. Put me through to Dad. The post had 2 million views by the time the first local reporters arrived at the gate. On Twitter, the EI hashtags exploded. Slapped in first. Crest assault. Caldwell's son. Threads popped up dissecting every known fact. TikTok influencers were stitching the video with their reactions. Julian Caldwell was suddenly trending next to international news. At Crest Airlines corporate headquarters in Chicago, the executive wing lit up like a Christmas tree. CEO Jeffrey Langley was roused from a meeting. A junior communications associate had sent him the trending page. His jaw clenched. "Tell me this is fake," he said. "No, sir," replied his VP. "Passenger manifest confirms it. Melissa Hartley, veteran flight attendant, 17 years." Langley called an emergency board meeting. Legal began reviewing. Protocol. Public Relations advised immediate administrative leave. Human Resources prepared a statement. Everything moved fast, except the response. Melissa sat in a private office in the Denver terminal, staring at her lap. Her union rep stood silent beside her. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she said finally. "You struck him," the rep replied flatly. "I didn't think. He kept correcting me. I just reacted." "You slapped the son of a billionaire in front of witnesses." Melissa's breath hitched. "I'm not racist." "That's not the question they're asking." Her phone vibrated. 20 missed calls. She opened Instagram and saw her name in the comments. Her LinkedIn was down. Her home address had been posted online. The unraveling had begun. Meanwhile, Julian stayed quiet. In public silence, he exerted more power than any statement. News anchors speculated. Influencers debated. Celebrities reposted the video. Reginald Caldwell released a statement the next morning. "No man's child should be assaulted while confined in the sky. This is not about wealth. This is about dignity, and the systems that still believe dignity must be earned based on color." Julian declined all interviews. He issued no tweets. He didn't have to. The world was already speaking for him. 3 days later, the Federal Aviation Administration opened an official inquiry. A team of investigators arrived at Crest Airlines HQ with subpoenas for internal communications, in-flight records, and video surveillance. The footage confirmed everything. The slap, Julian's reaction, Melissa's escalating behavior, no mitigating context, no ambiguity. Crest Airlines released a revised statement. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and will take all necessary steps to ensure passenger safety and employee accountability." Too little, too late. Boycotts started with a whisper and grew into thunder. Activists organized campaigns online. Black travelers posted testimonials about microaggressions in first class. Celebrities canceled appearances sponsored by Crest. Influencers switched loyalty to rival carriers and made it known. Julian remained quiet, but he wasn't inactive. Eleanor James filed a civil suit, assault, emotional distress, and racial discrimination. A parallel filing named Crest Airlines for failing to discipline behavior historically known in internal reports. Multiple ex-employees stepped forward anonymously. At a dinner gala for diversity in aerospace, Reginald Caldwell was honored for lifetime achievement. In his speech, he said, "Justice is not always found in courtrooms. It is often whispered in the corridors of consequence." The room gave him a standing ovation. Behind closed doors in a neutral office, Julian and Melissa met face to face. She sat across from him, smaller than he remembered, hands folded, shoulders curled inward. A mediator sat nearby, silent. Julian didn't speak at first. He just watched her. She broke the silence. "I wasn't trying to... I didn't think..." Julian raised a hand. "No," he said. "You did think. You made a choice." Melissa's voice trembled. "I've lost everything." Julian's eyes stayed on hers. "You lost what you chose to gamble. My dignity was never yours to manage." Silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Melissa finally whispered, "I'm sorry." Julian stood. The mediator opened a folder to signal the session's close. Before leaving, Julian said, "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it so that next time you raise your hand, you remember what it cost you." He left without another word. Outside, the building, Leah was waiting with the car. "You okay?" she asked. Julian nodded. "I will be." And as the doors closed, the noise of a world still reacting faded behind them. What remained was the sound of progress, a slow, measured rhythm of a man refusing to be silent, Justice wasn't loud. It was precise. Months later, the world had moved on, but not Julian. He stood before a crowd at the Smithsonian's Aviation Hall, unveiling a new initiative, the Caldwell Foundation for Equitable Skies, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit aimed at training, hiring, and protecting underrepresented groups in aviation. Flight attendants, pilots, executives, everyone. He spoke briefly. I never asked for a spotlight, but now that it's here, it's time to redirect it. We're not just changing rules, we're changing altitude. Applause thundered. Crest Airlines, now under new management, adopted several policies from the Foundation's pilot program. Quietly, other airlines followed. DEI consultants reported historic upticks in corporate engagement across industries. Melissa, out of the public eye, retired early. She issued a public apology, scripted, contrite, but sincere. What I did was wrong. I'm now working with DEI organizations to understand the harm I caused and help prevent it from happening to others. She took a job in training and compliance at a small regional airline. Her name faded from headlines. Julian didn't need to check. He was already somewhere else. A Gulfstream G800 sat idling on a private tarmac in Morocco. The sun cast golden streaks across its silver body. Julian, dressed in a crisp navy suit, stepped aboard. Leah followed with a tablet. Andre nodded at the flight crew. Everything was in order. Julian entered the cabin. The flight attendant greeted him by name, with respect but no performance. A genuine welcome. He took his seat, this time not as a passenger, but as principal stakeholder. This aircraft bore the Caldwell insignia on its wing. Julian looked out the window, not at the sky, but beyond it. The door sealed, the jet moved, and then it rose, not just a flight, but a future. One built on justice, powered by grace, and charted by a man who knew the value of stillness and the cost of silence. The sky was no longer neutral. It had been claimed. A year later, Flight 742 was still a reference point in aviation, HR training, and civil discourse. Documentaries had aired, panels had debated, and policies had been rewritten. But to Julian, legacy wasn't found in media cycles. It was measured in momentum. The Caldwell Foundation had become a global force. Dozens of young black professionals had entered flight schools, aerospace internships, and airline management roles. Scholarships were created, safety protocols evolved. Airlines partnered with the foundation to build inclusive standards from gate to cockpit. Julian declined offers for television interviews and autobiographies. He appeared where it mattered: university commencements, aviation summits, and international policy forums. He didn't carry himself as a celebrity. He carried purpose. Leah now led the foundation's international expansion. Andre trained security teams on cultural sensitivity and nonviolent conflict de-escalation. The entire team, once caught in a maelstrom, had become architects of reform. One day, Julian received a handwritten letter. I was on that flight. I said nothing. I'm sorry for my silence. Thank you for not being silent for the rest of us. He kept it in his desk drawer. Not for pride, but as a reminder. Meanwhile, Crest Airlines established the Caldwell Protocol, a mandatory ethics and equity module that became standard across global airline training academies. A bronze plaque hung in their Chicago HQ lobby. A moment changed the skies. We chose not to let it pass us by. Melissa Hartley quietly helped train new flight attendants in conflict resolution. She never reclaimed her past, but she repurposed it. Julian's Gulfstream touchdown in Accra, Ghana, for an international summit on sustainable aviation and inclusive airspace. As he disembarked, young cadets greeted him with salutes and handshakes. He smiled, not because of recognition, but because the future was already boarding. Justice wasn't the destination. It was the runway, and the world was learning how to take off differently. 3 years after the incident, a feature film based on the story of Flight 742 premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. The script, written by a young black screenwriter who'd been inspired by Julian's foundation, drew international acclaim. It didn't dramatize the slap. It illuminated the systems behind it. It was raw, honest, and hopeful. Julian attended the premiere in a reserved row, tucked beside aviation leaders, civil rights activists, and his father. As the credits rolled and the standing ovation surged through the theater, he remained seated, absorbing it all with steady breath and quiet pride. Afterward, he was approached by an older white pilot. "I flew for 32 years. Retired last month. That film made me realize I never asked my crew how they were treated. I thought professionalism was neutrality. I was wrong. Thank you." Julian shook his hand. "Thank you for flying safely all those years, and for landing here today." Back in the U.S., new legislation called the Passenger Protection Equity Act passed both houses of Congress. It mandated bias training, in-flight surveillance standards, and transparent complaint tracking in all domestic carriers. The bill bore his name, informally known as Julian's Law. Melissa, now working as an equity consultant, testified during the final hearing. She didn't speak to defend herself. She spoke to protect the future. "Accountability is painful," she said, "but silence is worse." In schools, students wrote essays about what fairness in the skies should look like. Airline CEOs met quarterly in a coalition started by the Caldwell Foundation. And a mural of a black boy in a pilot's uniform, captioned, "Altitude is for everyone," was painted across a hangar wall in Atlanta. Julian, ever the architect of quiet progress, continued mentoring. He reminded students it wasn't just about fighting injustice, it was about building structures that made it obsolete. One day, a mother with her young son stopped him in an airport. "He wants to be a pilot. Because of you." Julian knelt to the boy's level. "Then I'll see you in the sky." Legacy wasn't loud. It echoed, and Flight 742 still flew, not just in memory, but in every reformed policy, every aspiring cadet, and every mind that refused to land in ignorance. 10 years after Flight 742, the aviation world looked markedly different. Julian R. Caldwell II had become a name associated with resilience, innovation, and equity. But Julian himself had stepped out of the spotlight. He chose a quieter existence, one built not on fame, but on stewardship. In a remote tech hub in Nairobi, the Caldwell Aerospace Innovation Lab opened its doors. The facility trained youth from underserved communities in drone tech, electric propulsion, and space systems engineering. It wasn't just about planes anymore. It was about the future of air, land, and orbit. Julian's work had begun to intersect with global climate initiatives, cleaner fuels, inclusive policy councils, and sustainable aviation corridors bore the fingerprints of his teams. He no longer had to call in favors. The world now called on him. He occasionally taught guest lectures at MIT, Spelman, and Stanford under the radar. Always returning to the same core message. Flight isn't about escaping. It's about connecting. One spring morning, Julian received an invitation from the United Nations. They wanted him to chair the newly formed Global Aviation Equity and Sustainability Task Force. He accepted quietly and set to work. Melissa, now a senior advisor for international aircrew ethics, joined the first summit as a delegate. Their reunion was brief but symbolic. There were no long conversations, just a shared nod. Some conflicts resolved not through closure, but through evolution. Leah had been promoted to director of the International Air Transport Equity Commission. Andre had started his own consulting firm, training diplomats in emotional intelligence and cultural security. Meanwhile, the mural in Atlanta was expanded to include portraits of female pilots, indigenous air traffic controllers, and disabled aerospace engineers. Altitude wasn't just for everyone, it was created by everyone. On the 10th anniversary of Flight 742, a commemorative flight took place. Same route, same number, but this time flown by a black female pilot with a fully inclusive crew and passengers from over 30 countries. Julian sat in seat 2A, not in first class, but coach, next to a teenage girl flying solo to visit her grandmother. She turned to him, mid-flight, and asked, "Do you fly a lot?" He smiled. Enough to know why it matters. She didn't recognize him. She didn't need to. The skies were different now. Flight 742 had become more than an event. It was a reminder. Change, real change, travels farther than we think. And sometimes, the highest journey begins from the lowest moment. And above the clouds, a new horizon always waits. Years had passed since the turbulence of Flight 742, but the journey was far from over. Julian stood on the rooftop terrace of the Caldwell Aerospace Innovation Lab, the sun setting over Nairobi's skyline. Around him, young engineers and pilots prepared for their own first flights, literal and metaphorical. He thought back to that day in the cabin, the clash, the silence, the roar of voices that followed. It was never about one slap, one man, or one moment. It was about the thousands of invisible moments that built the sky's vast expanse, where equity and dignity had too long been grounded. A message chimed on his phone. It was from a young woman, one of the lab's first graduates, now flying a commercial route from Lagos to London. "Thank you for clearing the runway. I'm ready to soar." Julian smiled softly. The world was no longer a place of barriers, but of bridges, of open skies. He closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, and felt the wind beneath his wings. The future was taking off, and this time, everyone was invited. The story of Flight 742 is more than an incident. It is a testament to the power of courage, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. In the skies and on the ground, change is never easy, but it is always possible. Julian's journey reminds us that every moment, every choice can rewrite the rules, that progress is a flight path, not a destination. And as the world learns to soar with greater equity, dignity, and respect, the legacy of Flight 742 lives on, lifting all who dare to take off.